Areena.
What was it like to work at Nokia during its peak, when the company was producing millions of phones every month? In the 90s, working at Nokia was a bit like being at Apple or Google today. In this episode, we hear first-hand accounts from some of those who moved to Finland to help make it happen.
We were a bunch of kids who've all gone on to do really exciting things around Finland and elsewhere.
Hello and welcome to All Points North. I'm Egan Richardson.
And I'm Zena Iovino. Here on APN, we're starting the new year with a splash of 90s nostalgia. The 90s are in, Egan.
They are indeed, and of course I'm always happy to remember a time when Sheffield Wednesday were successful.
But this isn't a football show. Today we're looking at Nokia's mobile phones that were pop culture mainstays in the late 90s and early 2000s. Later, we'll hear more about a new online archive that brings together thousands of the Finnish mobile phone makers' documents, early models, and designs. But first, we want to look at the personal stories behind the tech success.
Nokia brought a lot of foreigners to work in Finland during the time when Finland was at the centre of mobile phone innovation. No company since has attracted as many foreign workers to Finland, and the Finnish economy hasn't seen significant growth over the past 15 years either.
That's right. For many years, Nokia was the undisputed king of the cell phone market and a big engine in the Finnish economy, like you just said. But being on top for so long seemed to make the company slow to react to industry changes, especially after Apple launched the iPhone. The rest is pretty much history.
It is indeed. There was a decline, of course, and the company is no longer the mobile phone master it once was. But for a time, it was the global leader. And this week, we're asking what it was like for those who made it happen. Specifically, the foreigners who moved to Finland to work for Nokia.
As we'll hear, it was a different era. Up to the early 90s, Nokia was a fairly boring company with roots in the town of the same name and lines of business in many sectors, including rubber boots. But from the 1960s onwards, it moved to become Finland's leading expert on mobile telephony and networks. That phone making peaked in the mid-noughties when it was producing 1.3 million phones a day, while employing over 20,000 people in Finland and more than 100,000 elsewhere.
In 1992, the company made the first ever GSM phone, the Nokia 1011. And the company was betting big on mobiles becoming a consumer staple all over the world. To do that, they needed an international workforce, and that's when Tim Rowe joined the company. He was working for Vodafone in the UK at the time, but a chance encounter saw him take the plunge and start a new life in Finland.
And I met a guy in a pub, a Finnish guy in a pub in Wiltshire in England, and basically, because there was no HR department that I was aware of, and he said, "Do you want to join?" And I said, yes. And so I took the step into the unknown of moving to Finland. And it was a culture shock. And you will no doubt recall, or you're aware, that Nokia was not even in the European Union back in those days, in 92. So it was really stepping out into an unknown country from my point of view. I mean, I consider myself a reasonably educated individual, but I knew very little about Finland. I was perfectly aware of Helsinki being the capital, and I knew of Tiina Liilak, who was a javelin thrower for Finland back in the day, and back then athletics was quite often on British TV. So I knew a splattering of things about Finland, but not much else. Back in those days, of course, there was no internet. So if you wanted to learn about a place, you had to go to the library and borrow a book. It sounds so archaic now, but that's how you did things then. And I remember my father finding a few books about Finland, and we'd never heard of Tampere, simply never heard of it.
As many people will know, moving to Finland can involve some form of culture shock. It was striking that Tim repeatedly mentioned the camaraderie of the Nokia workforce back in the 1990s, and there was one aspect of Finnish culture he was quickly introduced to.
And I'd only been a few weeks in Finland, and there was a sauna evening as I went along, and it was a culture shock to me because it was so Finnish. Here we are in the office surrounded by technical equipment in the sauna, naked and in the sauna with everyone holding a beer bottle. And of course, no one says anything for the first half an hour. And I remember thinking, what the hell am I doing here? What's this all about? And then Finns notoriously flick a switch, don't they? And they go from being completely quiet and silent and introverted into totally extroverted, throwing beer around. So there was definitely a lot of fun with sauna evenings and parties. But everyone knew their responsibility to work hard and to deliver for the company. There was a feeling of pride and satisfaction to work for Nokia in the early days. I've no idea if that still exists today. Maybe it does, but that was very much how things were.
In decades past, drinking and sauna culture in Finland, like in other Nordic and Baltic countries, has been a way of social bonding in business settings. But in recent years, certain aspects of this culture have come under scrutiny, driven by changes in health and attitudes, not to mention Me Too.
Indeed, things have changed since the 1990s. Finnish business looks quite different nowadays. And that's not the only thing that's changed since the early days of Nokia's rise to global domination.
It was also endless travel. I mean, you and I are talking now on a Zoom call or whatever the hell it is. There was none of that back in the day. So if you wanted to have a meeting in Bangkok with somebody, you would fly there. And I don't know how many Finnair frequent flyer points I've racked up over the years, but it's quite a lot. So it was almost like, and as an expat, you could almost look at a map of the world and decide where you wanted to go and work. And you could just go there. I don't think we'll ever see those days again in this world. But it probably wasn't very eco-friendly to be flying around for meetings and so on and so forth. But that was the world back then.
Were you aware of like the behemoth that it was becoming, the big story it was? Did you all understand how big this was for Finland at the time? Or is it only looking back that you think, wow, we did something special there?
Well, if I go back to 92, I don't think anyone realized what it was going to become, because I don't think anyone knew what the industry was going to become. So I think those early days, there was a spirit of adventure. We knew we were doing something a bit groundbreaking. Mobile phones. You remember back in the day, hardly anyone had a mobile phone, and it was the size of a house brick or something. So Nokia was pioneering in the sense of bringing mobile telephony to more and more people. So in that sense, it was groundbreaking, but I don't think anyone was thinking that Nokia would become the darling of the New York Stock Exchange, which they did become for a while. So it was exciting, it was vibrant, it was young. It struck me how educated all my colleagues were at Nokia. Most of them put me to shame when it came to educational qualifications, and we were on a roll. Endless travel, burning the candle at both ends, or whatever phrase you want to use, excitement, new things. But as the company grew bigger, it did become obvious that we were an important flagship for Finland. And in 98, I moved to China. And one of the roles I had in China, over and above my specific work duties, was to be in charge of all the expats, Finnish expats in China, irrespective of which individual part of the company they work for. I do remember that sometimes Finns on the Finnair flight to Beijing would perhaps not always be behaving very appropriately because they felt that, quotes, Finnair only exists because of Nokia. And I had to reprimand people a few times about this attitude, but there was a feeling that we were an unstoppable force by that time, in the late 90s.
And that was Tim Rowe, who joined the Nokia workforce in the 1990s. He was part of the rise to global prominence, but as we mentioned, there was also a decline.
Yes, once Nokia became a global leader, the company's budgets and hubris grew. But it was still a fun place to work. To find out more about that time at the company, I talked to Philip Schwartzman, who worked for Nokia for around a decade until getting laid off in 2012.
So a lot of my colleagues in marketing, we were all really young. We had a very young marketing department. I mean, the leaders of the marketing department were in their some of the directors there were in their 30s. We were all in our 20s. At the time, I didn't know how good I had it. We lived in really exciting times with big budgets. I know for myself, at the time, I was the digital marketing manager of Nokia N-Gage, which was the gaming device, which then became a piece of software that could be put on the phones after the hardware had stopped. I had a personal budget of 2 million euros. I didn't have to get any approval unless I spent 250,000 euros. I didn't have to get any sort of approval above directors, which is crazy.
Well, that certainly sounds impressive. I imagine most companies these days have somewhat different budgets and approval processes. I know Ula certainly does.
Working on this episode has really been a trip down memory lane for me. And Phil and I also talked about what it was like to get a hold of that Nokia communicator, which was groundbreaking at the time. I don't know if you remember.
I do.
It had full internet access and a keyboard.
It looked space-age, didn't it?
It was very fancy at the time.
They issued everybody a Nokia communicator. I think it was the 9110i was the first one. I remember I was really excited about that. I think it was the most expensive phone that they had. And I don't know why I remember this. I remember I was going in to buy a car. I was rather new to Finland and started working and finally had some money to go look at buying a car. I'm sure it was a used car. It was a Volkswagen dealership in Espoo. And like, I wasn't getting any respect. I was walking around the showroom and no one was looking at me. I was like kind of a kid. And so I pulled out my Nokia 9210i and had it in my hand to show the salespeople that I mean business, that I'm a real person. And at work, I think someone came up to me. I don't know if it was the phone or not, but if you had one of those devices, you had arrived. You were in the business world and was deserving of a 7,000 euro used Volkswagen Golf.
So Nokia was clearly doing very well, and that may have made some at the company a little complacent.
I remember very vividly when the iPhone first came out, and it came out in the United States, and I was in the marketing organization, and one of my colleagues went over to New York to get an iPhone and bring it back, and so we could look at it. And this was our Nokia devices were far superior in just about every category. The hardware, we had 3G. There was the iPhone was only 2G. But there was one big difference, and that was with the touchscreen technology. And I remember very vividly when he brought it back, and we were at Nokia Talo in Espoo, and up on the 6th floor, and just kind of looking at it and laughing. It had no apps. You could not install any apps. It didn't have like the speed specs that we had, but that touch screen was beautiful. And while all my other colleagues were kind of laughing at it as a joke, we thought this would be a blip on the radar. Maybe that would be Apple's only device. I was looking at it and really enjoying the user interface, and it definitely was a little bit worried. And that was very much the beginning of the end for Nokia.
You know, this repository focuses on design and how things looked and sleekness and art. And, some have over the years argued that there was too much focus on design and too little on technology, especially, like you said, considering what happened once Apple and Google started growing their market share. What do you think?
Yeah, we did. So I was the editor-in-chief of Nokia Conversations for a while. That was Nokia's official public blog, and we got something like 1 million views a day. It was wild, and we did an article. We did a story once about the headline had something to do with all the black rectangles. We went to one of these big events, 3GSM, which is in Barcelona every year, a big mobile phone event, and every single new phone was this black rectangle. And of course, Nokia phones were different colors and shapes and sizes, and we laughed at the fact that all these black rectangles are being released, and how do you choose which black rectangle? And that's what people chose. They want the black rectangle. So I was there's a lot of beauty in those old Nokia phones. I used to get free ones. I'm so sad I got rid of those all. I had dozens and dozens of them. I remember one year we released, was it 50 some different phones, different form factors. Each of those had different colors within the form factors, and they are truly pieces of art. And I'm not sure I can say the same about the iPhone and some of the other modern phones. We were a bunch of kids in a way, and who've all gone on to do really exciting things around Finland and elsewhere. I moved back to Nokia had shut down their offices in Dallas and New York and opened up in Silicon Valley to compete with the iPhone. They wanted to get closer to Silicon Valley and I had relocated back to the United States in 2011 to join that office, and it looks like apparently I had left at the right time. Nokia really had, I was actually laid off from Nokia about a year after that move. So I came back to the US just to get laid off, I believe even less than a year later. A lot of people were given the option to move to Redmond or move to Seattle or move or be laid off. And I was not. I just came to California. I fell in love with San Francisco and California, and there was no way I was going up to rainy Washington State to work for Microsoft, who I wasn't a big fan of.
And that was Philip Schwartzman talking to us from sunny California. He's not the only one to be relocated by Nokia. Tim Rowe also said he has a permanent base in Tampere, despite leaving Nokia more than 15 years ago.
And your Tampere is home, despite this global footprint. You've decided to put down roots there.
Obviously, I took a shine to Finnish lady. So, yeah, we have a home in Tampere, as indeed we do in the UK. And I spend summers and a little bit of winter in Tampere. I love the place. Tampere as a city is unrecognizable today to what it was back in the day. There were no trams, there was no tawny hotels, there was no none of the infrastructure that there is today. But it was always a great place to live, and so Tampere will be very special in my heart.
And that was Tim Rowe. Nokia's fabled history is in the spotlight this month with Aalto University's online design repository. Like we said at the top of the show, the archive houses marketing materials, sketches and presentations on what was Finland's most famous company.
Here's Anna Valtonen. She's the lead researcher at the Nokia Design Archive and a former Nokian herself.
So if you're interested in a particular, in phones, you can look for those designs. But I think if you are a researcher who looks into how organizations are developed, you can find that. Or if you're interested to understand how are trends being built, you can find that. Or if you want to see, if you're curious about Y2K, you can find funny stories from how the world was seen in those times. So today we talk a lot about how important it is to have data, and we, on a national level too, there's big data of different kinds, and it's quite often numeric and things like healthcare data, and you can do research on that and understand more with it. But we don't talk so much about qualitative data that's more descriptive, that describes what people are and how they worked and what they did and so on. And I think if we want to get a bigger understanding of what's happening around us, it's really quite cool, I'd say, that we have this kind of broad data sets available to anyone to dig into.
And that was Anna Valtonen, Dean of the School of Arts at Aalto University.
And remember, we are always happy to hear from you on WhatsApp. Did you work for Nokia in the glory days? Maybe you have some other memories of Nokia from back in its heyday. If so, let us know. Send us a message or a voice note via +358 44 421 0909. Let's have a look at what else has been making the news in Finland this week. 2 NATO vessels sailed into the Gulf of Finland after leaders of 8 Baltic coastline states met in Helsinki to discuss how to prevent further damage to undersea infrastructure.
Discount retailer Tokmanni said it was entering the grocery market after acquiring the rights to exclusively carry Spar products in Finland.
The number of serious violent crimes committed in public places in Finland is on the rise, according to a report by the National Police Board. which noted that minors account for a third of suspects.
Former Prime Minister Sanna Marin was granted a restraining order against a man who has previous restraining orders filed against him.
Finland has many postdoctoral researchers struggling to find employment in an increasingly difficult job market. There are currently 1,400 unemployed PhD holders in Finland, with 2/3 being long-term unemployed.
In more education news, 13 Finnish universities will see new AI-focused professorships following a donation by an entrepreneur that's also drawn funding from the government.
The autonomous government of the Åland Islands said they were clamping down on homeschoolers, following a surge of families moving from Sweden, where homeschooling is prohibited.
Finland has seen unseasonably mild temperatures this week, with the mercury reaching nearly 10 degrees Celsius in southern and central parts of the country. Readings this high are quite exceptional, according to Yle meteorologists.
And there is light at the end of the winter tunnel for those in Utsjoki, where they will see the sun rise for the first time in 2 months this week. It's the end of the Kaamos period, when the sun does not rise for those in northernmost Finland.
And in more Lapland news, we reported that some tourists looking for the perfect shot in Finland's northern wilderness are trampling nature in the process.
Lots and lots of photos for social media. So all of my social media now, all my followers are seeing everything we're doing in great detail.
That news item focused on northwestern Finnish Lapland. Now, having traveled up there myself, I can see the appeal of capturing some great images. The only problem is my phone keeps freezing up when it gets that cold.
That happens to me too, and maybe that's something that some innovative Finnish company could sort out for us.
You can join the conversation too. We want to hear what's on your mind. Just leave us a voice note or text on WhatsApp. Our number is +358 44 421 0909.
This year, we're excited to launch a new segment called Ask Us Anything. Have you got a question? Then ask us and we'll do our best to find the answer. Send us a message or a voice note via +358 44 421 0909.
I have a question for you, Egan. What's a story you've covered recently that you think isn't getting much attention?
Heinola City Council.
Really? That small town near Lahti?
Yes, indeed. This week, I reported on the council there deciding that it would reject an attempt by a Finns Party councillor to change the content of school textbooks or to cover it up with stickers. I think that was the precise method he preferred. But he felt they were politically biased against his party. Now, this was rejected by the council, but I think it's interesting that this kind of political activity is happening in Finland now. It's happened elsewhere. We've seen it in the US, sometimes in the UK, different parts of the world where people are trying to influence the way children are taught. And I think it is happening in Finland now, and it might increase in the coming years. And we should be aware of that.
And we will be following that story, and we have that article on our website at yle.fi/news, along with other news from around the country. It's almost a wrap for today, but before we go, any special plans this wintry weekend, Egan?
Nothing special. It's not that wintry at the moment. I mean, I can see bare ground outside. The snow seems to be melting. But I may take a little trip to Hämeenlinna on Saturday. That's about as exciting as it gets.
All right. Well, I think it might be as wintry as it's going to get, so I think it's time for me to sharpen my ice skates. But I will probably also be checking out our favorite streaming platform, Yle Areena, which now includes the BBC series Voyage into the Unknown about our solar system. This show is actually voiced in both Finnish and English, and you can pick the language on the bottom right once you've opened up the program.
That's a tremendous feature. Is that new from Yle Areena?
I had actually not noticed it before. It was new to me.
Well, I will actually definitely check that out. But I think that really is all we have time for today. Thanks for listening, and thanks especially to our audio engineer today, Tuomas Vauhkonen. Bye.
Bye.